Hello everyone, this is Tidris. Today I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of my most recent track, Mammoth, out on Individual Identities now. If you haven't given it a listen, please go do that now, and let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the intro section to the track, and I'll just go ahead and start in the bass groups because that's what's really got the most stuff going on in this beginning part here. So there's a lot of different layers to this particular bass line, but I'll play it all in isolation here so you can give it a little, hear it on its own. So quite a lot happening there. The most notable, or probably one of my favorite parts of this bass line, is this effects bass here. And this is really a pretty simple sound if I take all of this processing off of it. There's some pretty extensive stuff happening on here, but if I turn all that off, it's just a pretty basic like saw bass sound from, I think it's from Spire. Yeah, so added a flanger, some distortion, reverb, then a whole bunch of compression, side chaining, a little bit of EQ, and then a gate to cut it all off at the end. So what that does is it just allows it so that this doesn't drag on too long. So once it's sort of less noticeable, it tamps it down all the way so that it doesn't get in the way of the rest of the mix. So that's probably one of my favorite sounds of this, and is actually one of the like starting points of where this track kind of originated. Next element is this like drop bass. So this is just a portion of the bass line from the drop that I pulled over into this section to just sort of fill things out. So it's a very, very aggressive, like just sort of sustained bass that's following the sort of same rhythm. And that's made up of a couple different layers. We got some Spire, got some Serum, and then some Massive. So just a lot of stuff going on in that one. It's also filtered down. Got some high end taken off to just make room for some other stuff. And then I've also got some filter automations happening here, which are what give that sort of movement. And that's being done with this auto filter here in this rack that I have. And that's just to sort of keep things interesting as time goes on in the bassline section in this intro part. Then I've got this sub here. This is like a supporting sub bass. It's not really a true sub because I've got sub in other areas, but like there's a sub in this dedicated drop bass here, and also some, I think, yeah, there isn't any in this intro bass section here. So it's just kind of filling in some of the gaps in the rest of the bass line. So here I've got sort of all of these sort of intro accent bass type things, and this is what those are sounding like. So this was the original bass that I started with when I was making this, and that's a combination of a whole bunch of different sounds, some Spire presets, some Serum presets, just kind of all put together into this one sound. Then I've got this Spire patch here that's just a sort of accent. Then another one doing a similar thing. It's got a little bit of a reverb on it to sort of fill in some of that space, because there's obviously there's a lot of stuff that's like really in your face in this intro section. So just adding that to kind of fill out some space and make it a little bit more full. Then we got this here. And this is one of the more like identifiable sounds in the bass line. It's a very aggressive hit that just kind of keeps things moving along and keeps things interesting. And then this bass here is really like an effect more than anything. It's almost like a downlifter. But it's just got these like saw waves that are phasing, and it's panning between the left and the right as time goes along. And it's just sort of adding some additional interest to this section and sort of like keeps the progression moving forward. So let me add in all of this now with the kick. So very, very clean on its own there. The kick is pretty basic. It's just a kick sample from some sample pack with some processing on it. And I think this LFO tool is just for, yeah, this was just for monitoring. This isn't actually doing anything. I was just looking at the waveform and trying to like tune some things when I was working on the project. So yeah, the next thing I'll talk about is the sort of ARP thing that comes in this intro section. So it's a mix of two different ARP sounds, and it's filtering up slowly. You can see in this automation here, and it comes in fully right around here. And you can see that with this filter automation here. So that's made up of two sounds. One that's a much more like standard saw wavy kind of sound. And that's panned off to the left. And that's just a very, I think if I open up Serum, it's a very basic just saw patch that's doing some filter automation on the envelope and that kind of thing. Then I've got this other layer here that's more of a kind of transient type layer. Got a very aggressive attack, and it's panned off to the left because we got a lot of stuff with these basses just sort of right down the center, and this isn't supposed to be the focus of this particular section anyway. It's really just a kind of accompaniment to the bass line that's happening, and then it comes in more on its own in the next breakdown section. So this is also a Serum patch, and it's also another very similar just saw wave kind of thing. It just has a much more aggressive kind of pitch envelope, I think. There's probably a pitch envelope on, yeah, coarse pitch on one of these envelopes here. So it's just kind of making it very attacky and kind of helping it cut through a little bit. So then I've just got a little reverb and a sidechain using LFO tool on it to kind of keep it out of the way of the kick. Then next bit, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into the risers and fallers and stuff like that. It's pretty basic stuff, just whooshes and impacts and those sorts of things. A reverse clap. And then I've got this Atmos section here, which is really just a sample with, I think, some reverb and auto pan on it. And this is, again, just filling out the space because we've got a lot of stuff that's super in your face and aggressive with the bass line. So just filling out the sort of sides and back of the mix to make it feel much more full and get that kind of wall of sound going. Also got this pitch bend thing. You can't really hear it in the context here, but you can later on in the breakdown. It's this pitch bendy atmospheric thing that just sort of plays in the background. Then the next bit is the vocal atmosphere that I've got in this track. So this is a sample from like an atmospheric sample pack, and it's played primarily in the breakdown, but this is sort of a call ahead to what you're going to be hearing. And again, it's filling in a lot of that sort of background space in this section because we don't have a ton happening in that area right now, and just filling in all of that space and kind of calling ahead to what's going to be coming in the breakdown section. So yeah, just got some extra reverb and stuff on that, a little bit of delay, and just really pushing it back in the mix and not making it super present. But in the context of this section, you can really, it really stands out because again, there's not a ton going on there. So now that we've gotten into this sort of section here, I'll start talking about the drums a bit more. So the drums are pretty straightforward. There's not a ton going on. I got some toms and stuff as fills, some percussion, and then really not much else going on. All of this over here is like some fill stuff as well. So if we just solo all of this, I'll add in the kick as well. Cool. Okay, so we've got this snare here. So this is just a really dirty, aggressive snare. It's a big room snare from some sample pack that I have. and just going through some compression and a transient shaper, as well as some other stuff to like some reverb to put it in some space, and then also I'm sidechaining it to the toms so that the toms take priority. But I don't want to fully remove it because otherwise it doesn't have the sort of on again, off again relationship with the kick if you remove it out entirely, but you can still kind of tell that it's there even if it's ducking down quite a bit when the toms are playing. So it's just sort of a nice trick to keep that in there so you get that feeling of the groove still happening, but we can add in the toms as well to kind of mix things up. So next bit are the hats. So you can see here I have a lot of samples loaded into here, but I really only ended up using a couple of them. So this is just some MIDI that I programmed to, use for the hats, and these are just some, not super complicated hats, but you got some velocity changes here and there, and some like ghost notes so you get that kind of groove going. And I believe I also have I've got a sidechain on here as well. So this is not a super aggressive sidechain. This is really, well, I guess it is sort of aggressive, but basically this is just getting it out of the way of the kick and giving it that pumping feeling rather than letting all of those notes kind of play. So I tried to do some of that with the velocity automation, but this is just an easier way of kind of getting that groove pretty consistent so that, you're getting some of the stuff out of the way of the kick, but they're still playing a little bit. So you've got some volume kind of peeking through here. You can even see how the waveform is showing it. So yeah, it's just a nice simple way. So you don't want to completely cut it out because obviously you still want to sort of hear them. So you get that groovy feeling, but you want to pull out some of it, and adding a sidechain on there is a really easy way of doing that. So next thing is the ride. So this is a fairly standard, just like ride cymbal that's playing on every quarter note. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. And then I also have this reverse ride here that sort of leads into these next sections as sort of something to add a little interest and sort of lead you into the next section. And it's got a little bit of reverb and auto pan on it to kind of add some interest as well. So this is what it sounds like. So it kind of plays between the ears in between those sections, and there's some other stuff pulled out. Like you can see here, all of the other drums are pulled out for that section, so you can kind of actually hear it in the clear in those sections. So next bit are these sort of tom fills. And these are really just to, mix things up every, 8 bars or whatever this division is, and just sort of keep things kind of interesting and moving along. Nothing too terribly complicated. I also have this kick edition thing here. This is just something I added to the kick that I was sort of hearing something like this when I was working on the track, of just like an extra sort of click on the kick in some sections. And you really can't hear it in the context of the mix, but it just adds a little extra something to the track when we're going through. And yeah, you can't really hear it in the context of the mix, but I know it's there, so that's what's helpful. So then the last bit into this outro, or into the break section, are these sort of cinematic, like echo drum type things. And they're just to help, fill out this section and kind of lead into the more cinematic breakdown bit that I've got. So let me just play through this section here. So this is, a very gradual transition into the breakdown. What? And we're filtering down the bass sounds and the kick and all of the other stuff that's happening in this first section. So we're going from this more aggressive ARP sound from the intro that's just more full, has a more like mid energy to it, to this like sort of more calm, thin ARP in the breakdown section. And this just has, you know, a little bit more reverb and some delay, and it's a little bit more dreamy, fitting that sort of more chill breakdown vibe. And we're combining that with the addition of some more vocal atmospheres. So we've got some of the same vocal samples from before, as well as some other ones to, you know, add to that sort of vocal atmospheric feeling. And, you know, got a whole bunch of reverb kind of blurring all of those bits together. And that's just a very, you know, calm sort of feeling, brings the energy really far down from, you know, the more aggressive intro that we had. There's also some more atmospheres happening here. So I've got this rain stick sample with a whole bunch of reverb on it, that pitch bend that we were talking about earlier. There's this flutter sound that I really like. And then also got this tonal atmospheric sample from, I think it's Audio Imperia. And just, you know, creating that sort of very atmospheric, cinematic kind of vibe in the breakdown, which is something I was really, really going for in this particular track. So, also have some pad sounds here. So this is like a transition pad. It's just getting a filter automation here as time goes along. And then I bring that back down. And then we've got this very like basic super saw pad. This is, I think I've used this in a couple different tracks, but it's called Trance Floor. It's a really great, just solid super saw pad. Got a whole bunch of voices and just what sounds really good with the filter pretty low on it. So the next bit from the pad sections is the sort of strings that are happening. So this is a very like core piece of this particular track and was one of the parts that was in it from pretty early on. So it's this violin sample played through the East-West Play library. And it's just a really nice solo violin sample. It has a lot of vibrato and expression, and just sounds really good when you slap a whole bunch of reverb and delay on it. For whatever reason, it was super off to the left, so I just panned it off to the right to get it back in the center so that I could play around with it a little bit more granularly. And that plays in combination with the sort of full string section when we transition into the more like energetic and build section over here. And in order to get these strings sort of swelling the way that I wanted to, I just separated them into two different MIDI tracks. It was a little easier to get the virtual instrument to kind of play the way that I wanted it to. So I've got the first one playing these like full chords here, and then in the in-between sections, we just play these sort of short chords to sort of make that swelling feeling happen more naturally and smooth. Just the way that it was happening in the instrument itself was they were getting cut off too soon or too late, and it was just easier to control it by putting it in a separate instrument. So that's why there's actually two of these, but they're doing basically the same thing, just with different MIDI. So then as we go along here, we've got, I'll touch on this real quick. I bring in some of the percussion here. I think it's filtered down a little bit. Oh no, it's just lowered in volume. So I lower the volume of the percussion by, looks like about 10 dB here. And there must be a filter happening somewhere else. Yeah, there's a filter here as well. So it's being filtered out and it's lowered in volume, but it's just coming back in to sort of add some of that rhythmic element back to the track as we're transitioning from the sort of very atmospheric and like low energy breakdown into the build. So it's super subtle. You can only like just now hear it coming in as we've been talking about it, but that just helps sort of bring back some of that groove as we're transitioning into a new section of the track. So again, in this build section here, as we're adding more elements and transitioning into the drop, I'm sort of doing another trade-off between the breakdown ARP and the drop ARP. So the breakdown ARP, or this build ARP here, is basically the same patch here. I just had to do some minor tweaks to it, and it was easier to do it in another channel. So this is pretty much the same thing from the breakdown itself, and we're just doing some of the same filtering in and out of the filter cutoff, and we're slowly, gradually building in this build section to the drop, and we're introducing with this filter automation here on the drop ARP the high end of the drop ARP itself, which is much more aggressive. It has a lot more energy to it, and I'll just play that sort of from here so you can hear that. So got a lot more reverb on it, has a lot more high end, and it's just a much higher energy element. So if we sort of go in the middle here, you can hear that we're transitioning from this sound, this sort of more mellow ARP sound, to the more aggressive drop sound. And that just carries in and helps transition from one section to the next by, you know, keeping the MIDI the same. So it's playing the same notes, same pattern, but just with different sounds. You sort of transition from one to the other, and kind of using filters to do that transition more smoothly and sort of like pass the proverbial baton between the instruments. So the next element that comes in here is the is the lead. So this is just the lead for the section, and this is following very similar melodic line to the violin and the breakdown. And actually there is a violin layer to this synth down here. So it's a very aggressive sound, especially in isolation. I even have some like pretty severe notches here to cut out some of the very harsh frequencies in some of these sounds. But it's a combination of a couple different synths. I got this one, which is a Spire preset, this Serum preset, and then I think this is straight up the same violin sound from the breakdown, just in this sort of layered instrument. And you really can't pick it out. It's sort of melded together with all the other sounds, but it just adds some of that nice harmonic content from the string aspect. So, and then inside of here, I'm doing some pitch automations. So you've got like these pitch downs between notes. And that's just to make transitions between notes a little bit smoother, and also allows for just some added interest as the break or as the drop goes, because, you know, this is a fairly sparse melodic line. I mean, there's the first note goes for 3 measures. So it's got a lot of space that can be filled with, you know, other things. So the melody, you know, isn't always changing fast enough, and adding that pitch bend in helps sort of keep some of that interest alive. So, you know, we've already talked about the drums the kick, the bass. So the bass is actually the same one that we were using earlier in the intro bass section, but here it's just playing a slightly different pattern. So we're following the progression of the chords now with this MIDI. So we're also doing some like jumps here. So this is an octave jump, as well as some other notes as we go from measure to measure, just to keep things interesting and have it not just be a straight note, sustained note for the whole time. So if we go through, and that's just following the chord progression that we established in the breakdown, as well as following the chords. So I've got a pretty basic, chords preset going here. And this is just to fill out some of the space. It's not really anything too complicated. It's just basically a supersaw with some special waveforms that just adds a little bit of extra harmonic content to the drop to fill out any of the empty space that's being left by all the other instruments. So it's not really a super in-your-face element, but it is allowing that wall of sound to sort of be still very present. So yeah, we've got the drop arp that's playing, so it's playing the same progression as before. And then we've got the drums playing their full. And the, yeah. So that's really the core of it. So when we start combining all these things together, yeah, we've got the whole track Mammoth. So yeah, the only really other element that I'm adding, other than just changing things here and there as we're going, like changing the melodic line, is this effects bass. So I add this back in this section, which is like a very key part of the track. But this ends up following the chord progression now, so we're changing notes on these ones here. And yeah, it just helps to kind of, again, add another element to keep things interesting, and sort of calls back to the beginning section when we were introducing this for the first time, and really keeping the whole, feeling of the track cohesive. So other than that, it's pretty much it. There's, some effects here and there, so I'll just go through and solo this, but it's nothing real out of the ordinary. Got a whole bunch of impacts, some risers, fallers, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, so this is the radio edit, so it just goes to silence. But I also have the extended mix over here in the rest of the project as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm going through this pretty quick, obviously, but if there's anything else that anyone is interested in, I can go a little more in detail about any of the specific elements. But if not, I hope you guys enjoy the track. Please go give it a stream or buy it on Beatport. And huge thanks to the Individual Identity team. We've been working on this for quite some time. This track has been 2 years in the making. It's over 2 years old now. I started this a long time ago, and I've been working with the team over at Individual Identity for the last couple months, kind of getting it to the finish line. So it's been a real pleasure working with them, and hope to get more out with them at some point soon. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one.